Wait, what? I can do that? This is Eric Bell with Wait, What? Financial matters that matter for business and the people that own them. If you missed last week's episode on new marketing, the piece on crisis management that LaRon Anderson Bell spoke about was excellent. You should definitely check out that episode. I'm fortunate today to have Fred Whitaker with me, who is senior partner and managing partner for Cummins & White in Newport Beach. Fred has been with them since 1990. He is the partner in charge of transactional practice and continues to play that role today. The practice areas that Fred's firm covers are merger and acquisition, risk management and employment, corporate governance, commercial real estate, finance and due diligence, estate and tax planning. Fred is married, lives here in Southern California in Orange County. He has 3 children and his wife, Mignon. Thanks for coming. Appreciate you being here. You know, today's topic, we want to kind of focus. I know your firm covers a lot of things, but we want to focus on succession planning. And I was just wondering, just to start off, what's the biggest misconception about succession planning that clients have?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that it's not really succession planning, it's exit planning. You know, every business owner exits one way or another. They either exit because they've sold the business, or they have a disability, or they pass away, or they retire. Sometime, somewhere, everybody exits their business. People think of succession as, oh, who's my successor going to be? Well, it's really, how are you going to exit? And how do we plan for that exit? That's what true succession planning is about.
You know, why do people take so long to plan? It seems like this is kind of the last thing on their plate, or it's on the back burner a lot of times.
Well, I think it's a lot like estate planning. Everybody knows it's important, but it's not urgent. When you're in the daily throes of business and doing the things you need to do to make money and make your company grow, one of the last things that's on your list to do is think about how I'm going to prepare for the time when I have to leave the business. It's important. It's not urgent. And many of the people that I work with who have been kind of devotees of Stephen Covey and planning, they know that this is really kind of quadrant 2 work. See, it's important, but it's not urgent, and you need to spend more time in that quadrant, but daily life gets in the way. People spend time in quadrant 1 where it's urgent and important, and they tend not to focus on this long-term planning.
Fred, when you look at succession planning, what are some of the first things that someone should consider when looking at this?
I think the first thing that happens is, because it's exit planning, they really need to think about it as a problem to solve. And entrepreneurs and business owners are really good at solving problems. So they need to kind of scope it out and say, how would we solve the problem? What are the types of exits or successors that I'm likely to have, and who could that be? Could it be my kids? Could it be other family members? Could it be all of the employees taking the business on? Is it maybe 1 or 2 key management people? Is it a strategic buyer? And we're going to define strategic buyer as being somebody who is a natural competitor who's in the same space, in the same industry. Or is it a financial buyer? And there's been a lot of talk of financial buyers lately because the market is so full of private equity money looking for deals. So the typical thing are strategic buyers were always willing to pay a premium compared to financial buyers. In the last few years hasn't been true. Actually, you've been having a number of financial buyers willing to pay more than a strategic buyer simply because they need deals. And so you have to look at that group of potential successions and say, which are the ones that are most likely for my business?
Fred, I saw an interesting statistic that 90% of U.S. businesses are family-owned, and that makes up 50% of our GMP, and 30% of the companies with sales exceed $1 billion. I'm just wondering, when you look at the right type of successor, how do you aim for the right type? How do you get the right type, or how do you pick, especially with the family dynamic involved sometimes?
Well, we specialize in family-held businesses. I was in-house counsel at a 3-generation family-held business. And there's a lot of emphasis in family-held businesses about having that legacy continue in the family. But people have to get out of the idea that it's going to continue in the exact same way that you did it. It may be a legacy for the family, but it may be where certain family members really aren't going to be that adept at managing that business. And they're really folks who would be better at being silent investors in the business going forward. I think when you have to look at succession, you have to look at, this is an operating company. It needs an operator to be able to operate it. When we talked about a couple of minutes ago, all those different types of exits, there's only one, and only part of one, that doesn't need an operator to continue the business where you're at. And that is a strategic buyer, in other words, a competitor, that's actually in your same marketplace. They're the only type of buyer that doesn't need operational leadership to stay in place when the company goes forward. So if you want to limit your ability to exit the business to only that one little segment, don't have a successor. Don't find an operator to run the business. But think about it this way. If you want to have the legacy for your kids, and maybe there's one kid who's a good operator and the others aren't, all right, well, then let's focus on that one being a good operator. But even with employees as a whole running the business, a few managers running the business, definitely a financial buyer who's just building up a portfolio of companies that may not be in this industry segment, or most strategic buyers who may not be actually in your locality, we have to have, for any of these to really succeed, we have to have good daily operational leadership that you've built up inside the company. Operating companies need operators.
You know, when you talk about operators, Fred, I've seen situations where son may be in the business since he was 16. He's now 50. Dad's going to retire. Sister went away to a good college, has an accounting degree, so she's CFO. So in her mind, she thinks she's a successor. In his mind, he thinks he's the successor. Is there a way to equalize that at the end of the day, or some family governance that you can put around the business, or how does that work?
Well, I think every dynamic is a little bit different. Certainly, I think with good governance and good job roles described in that particular circumstance, you can achieve essentially with two people what you're doing with the one entrepreneur who is now exiting the business. One of the things that I often talk about when I'm doing these presentations to trade associations is what are the qualities that are needed to be a good successor. We look at three different groups of qualities: the personal qualities, the financial qualities, and the operational qualities, and then we take a look at different parts of those. So you end up really, in looking at somebody's qualities, about 9 different qualities that make up somebody that's like the entrepreneur. And I think the mistake that people make is they think it needs to be a clone of themselves. And they look at their kids, or they look at maybe their general manager, or they look at maybe a competitor's general manager, and they go, well, they don't have all the same qualities I do, and so I really can't put anybody in there. The thing is that if you actually get about 6 out of 9 of those qualities, you know, for instance, on the financial side, is somebody an underachiever or an overachiever of wealth? For people who know the Millionaire Next Door book series,
Right.
If somebody is an overachiever of wealth, that's a good idea of how they're going to be in managing your asset, right? In the operational, do they have a great work ethic? In the personal, do they have a passion for what they're doing? If you can get about 6 out of 9 of the qualities, you probably have a good operational successor. You don't need to have a clone of the entrepreneur who's going to drive the business all the way forward. And so like in the scenario you talked about where you had 2, you can have somebody who is, say, the leader on the sales side, who may be in that president's role,
Right.
who's got, 5 or 6 of those qualities. And then maybe somebody on the CFO side who's got another 5 or 6 of those qualities. And together you have the operational leadership needed to move the company forward in the absence of the original entrepreneur.
I guess it's a case of everybody putting their ego on the hanger outside the door and just doing what's best for the company.
Oh, absolutely.
I was going to ask you, what is often overlooked in succession planning?
I always think the biggest thing that's overlooked, and in my 30 years of experience, it's happened time and time again, is what is that entrepreneur, what's the owner, even if it's a second generation business, what's that next step for the person who's leaving? What's their significant role in life going forward? What's their purpose? All of us need to have a purpose. We all have a reason for getting up in the morning and going out and having a great day. And for the entrepreneur or the person who's owned their business, that really day after day, 20, 30, 40 years has been the business. And so you give it to the kids, you sell it to your managers, you sell it to your competitor, and then the next day you're having to, even if you're around for a little bit, you're having to take orders from somebody else. It's not in their wheelhouse naturally to go take a second position. So I have seen so many entrepreneurs who have sold their business or given their business down to the next generation unhappy and actually unconsciously undermine the structures that have been put in place for the succession to go well, and end up sometimes 2 or 3 years later killing a deal. They really need to say, I have to understand what my next act or role in life is, and I'm looking forward to going there, so that when the opportunity is right, they can take that opportunity and make sure the succession works well, because somebody who's coming up has to feel like they have to have the reign.
Right.
And the person who's leaving has to say, I'm ready to leave.
When you look at it differently, Fred, and you're looking at getting the most value for a business, How do you go about doing that?
Well, I think the first thing that any business owner should do is get a good independent third-party valuation of the business. There's a reason for this. Many entrepreneurs have either an overinflated sense of the value of the business, and that could be because it provides a very good lifestyle. Many entrepreneurs have an unrealistically pessimistic view of the value of their business. The third-party valuation really allows you to see what that business is worth in the marketplace so that if opportunities come around, say your managers are ready to buy the business from you, or you're ready to give it to your kids in an estate plan, or you're ready to sell it, you know what it's really worth and you set your expectations in the proper place. Another thing that I think is really critical with having a third-party valuation is that it's done by an appraiser that's what they do.
Not an investment bank.
Not an investment bank. Investment banks have a great role to play in succession planning, and we use them all the time, and they're very valuable and worth all the money that's paid. But there's an inherent difference when the valuation comes from an independent versus the person who's actually going to list your business for sale. And I think gives you a much more realistic view of the business and an ability to help you determine where your bottom line is, to have that independent valuation before you go find the people who are going to take you to market.
Is there anything I need to do to get ready to sell?
Well, this is where I think investment bankers can add great value. One of the things that we see often with entrepreneurially led businesses is that the tax tail wags the dog. And so businesses are often run for the benefit of the owners and the ownership's family. Certainly a lot of moves that are well within the law are taken to accelerate depreciation or have expenses that a financial buyer may not usually put through a company. An investment banker can look through all of that and help you with your own internal controller and your outside CPA recast your financial statements to be something that independent buyer could say, all right, is rateable for the future going forward. That can take several months. The other thing that I think you really need to do is put together a great story about the business. I think this is important for anybody who's going to end up being your buyer, whether it's your own kids or whether it's a financial buyer. The story of the business and the future look for the business is really important. I find that investment bankers are particularly adept at putting that together in a deck that ends up being the way that if you're going to go with a third-party sale out in the marketplace, really drives a lot of interest.
So they're the key people to determine where you should go to sell, or what's your thought?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that an investment banker does is that they get a sense of who's out in the market as a potential buyer, both strategic and financial. And they give you a really good market analysis of what the demand level is for the business and what you're able to get. And they then can create an auction-like atmosphere for the business that can drive value as much as possible.
What is the right type of structure for a sale? Fred, is there any particular structure you should have?
Well, that's the fun thing. People like to get and talk about structure all the time, and I really think that often gets the cart before the horse. We need to take a look at where our potential succession is, whether it's inside the family, all of your employees, it's management, and maybe it's management, employees, and family combined. Maybe it's an independent buyer, and we need to take a look at the value that's happening. You know, we often want to get 100% stock sale for all cash for the owner and go into the sunset. For most privately held companies, that's really not going to occur. But by the same token, you don't have to accept a deal that is an asset purchase where everything is on a promissory note or an earnout for years to come. We actually often look at where's the value in the deal, who are the buyers, and then we develop the structures to try and get the most tax efficient possible for you, the owner of the business, while still making it attractive for the buyer. And so, you can have a combination of structures. You can have cash in and earnout, cash in and earnout in an employment agreement. Maybe we have a leasing company where you lease some of the assets to the people who are buying it, and I can put some money away in a defined benefit plan for you And that way I'm going to get a preferred tax rate that might be the equivalent of a stock sale, even though they're buying assets. If you're selling to the employees or management, maybe there's a combination where partly an ESOP works and partly a leverage management buyout works. Eric, you and I have talked a lot about deferred installment sales as a good way to make sure that we can be tax efficient for the owner.
Right.
831B captives can be used in terms of a planning tool now for income tax and a planning tool for your state tax and getting some of the asset value out over time so that it's actually easier maybe for your kids or your managers to buy it. I try to encourage people not to immediately think about structure, but we think about value and we think about who the potential buyers are. And then we meet the structure to the buyers and we put different parts of structures together. And that's the puzzle piece. That's why it's fun to do.
You know, Fred, early on, I know with family businesses anyway, they're kind of loose with their governance because it's the family, but I know they're held to the same responsibilities like a Walmart.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, one of the things that's very typical in a privately held company is that your annual record-keeping requirements, whether it be minutes of meetings, voting in your directors, voting in your officers, those can often just go by the wayside because it's always the same people every time. And the first time that somebody gets a little bit nervous is when the IRS wants to come in and examine 1 year of your tax returns, and all of a sudden you haven't done your minutes. Well, the same thing is going to occur when you go to sell your business, even if it's to some of your management who have been there the whole time. They're potentially buying successor liability. They want to see that all the corporate governance and upkeep have been done so that they know they don't have liability going forward. Having a firm like ours do it with a paralegal or a junior associate and your internal staff is something that's just good governance going forward. And it also makes sure that you have really good roles and responsibilities for your employees so that management can come in on a succession and say, all right, everybody knows where they're supposed to be, what they're doing, how the proper way to act is, and we document it every year.
You know, Fred, that's about all I have. Is there anything that I've left out that you think we should cover before signing off?
I just think, Eric, that like all of us in our daily lives, we need to look at the things that are important, even though they may not be urgent, and put them a little higher on our priority list. Because certainly for most people, they can say, well, succession planning is when I want to be in my 60s and want to retire, and I'm only in my 40s now. But you don't know when the right opportunities are going to come around. For instance, right now, we have probably the most money in private equity waiting and looking for deals that we've ever had. We have some of the lowest interest rates we've ever had, which make it easier for buyers to fund deals. We don't know if we're going to go into a softening in a couple of years. You might be in your 40s or 50s now, but this actually might be the better time to sell or transition. You need to be ready for opportunities whenever opportunities arise. And if you're planning well ahead of time, then more opportunities open up. And you have that ability to leave it to your kids if you've picked a successor, even if your kids don't really know how to run the business, because you have operational leadership. You have the ability to sell it to that manager or a group of employees. You have ability to sell it to a third party, whether that's a financial buyer or a strategic buyer. This type of planning, I just encourage everybody, put a little higher on your priority list, no matter what your age is or where you are in your stage of business, because that will allow you to have the right planning in place so that opportunities can turn into good goals.
And Fred, lastly, this is a nationwide broadcast, but your firm can collaborate with people in other states if needed, right?
We do that all the time. We are in cross-border transactions like almost any law firm from Los Angeles to Chicago or New York. And then what we do is we work with local counsel on things that require local counsel, like the finance opinions.
Well, again, I have Fred Whitaker with me, senior partner and managing partner for Cummins & White in Newport Beach, California. Thanks for being with us, Fred.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.